Have you ever noticed something strange? That the smartest person in the room is often the one who struggles the most to be heard, not because their ideas are weak, but because something else is. Here's the uncomfortable truth. You were never meant to choose between being intelligent and being strong, but somewhere along the way, you were programmed to believe you had to. Every cartoon, every movie, every story you grew up with repeated the same lie. The strong man was stupid, the smart man was weak, and without realizing it, you picked a side. But what if that choice was the very thing limiting your life? Because history tells a completely different story. The most dangerous men who ever lived were not one-dimensional, they were complete. Miyamoto Musashi, the undefeated samurai, didn't just win over 60 duels to the death. He painted, wrote philosophy, and mastered strategy at a level most people today can't even comprehend. For him, strength and intelligence were never separate. They were one system. And that's the truth no one told you. You don't lack discipline. You don't lack intelligence. You are simply divided. A sharp mind, trapped inside a weak body, or a strong body, without the clarity to direct it. Either way, you are operating at half capacity. But here's the promise. By the end of this video, you will see exactly how much of your potential has been locked away. And more importantly, how to reclaim it. Because the moment you stop choosing between mind and body, and start training them as one, everything changes. So before we go deeper, I want to ask you something simple. If you've ever felt like you had more potential than you could express, type yes in the comments. Now let me tell you a story. Because this isn't theory. This is about a man who did everything right, and still failed when it mattered most. His name wasn't important, but what happened to him might feel uncomfortably familiar, and once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it. Chapter 1. The Invisible Prison, New York City, 2:13 a.m. The glow of a laptop screen was the only light in the room. Ethan sat frozen, eyes locked on lines of code he had already rewritten 3 times. His 5th cup of coffee had gone cold beside him, untouched, not because he wasn't tired, but because he was exhausted in a way caffeine couldn't fix. On paper, Ethan was exactly what the modern world rewards. Brilliant, analytical, precise. At 30 years old, he was already one of the most respected problem solvers in his company. When things broke, they called him. When systems failed, he fixed them. When others got stuck, he saw patterns no one else could see. His mind was his weapon, and for years he sharpened it relentlessly. Books, courses, frameworks, strategies, every spare hour invested into becoming smarter. And it worked. Promotions came. Recognition followed. His reputation grew quietly but steadily, but there was one part of his life he ignored completely: his body. To Ethan, physical training was a distraction, a waste of time for people who had nothing better to do. He used to joke about it with colleagues. "Why spend an hour lifting weights," he would say, "when I can learn something that actually matters?" And everyone laughed. But no one saw what was happening behind the scenes, because slowly, silently, his strength was eroding, not just physically, mentally. It started small, a constant fatigue that sleep couldn't fix, a restless mind that couldn't stay focused for more than a few minutes, a strange anxiety that appeared in moments that should have been easy. Then came the moment that changed everything. The boardroom, a high-stakes presentation, months of preparation, data, strategy, projections all flawless. Ethan knew his idea was the best in the room, but when it was his turn to speak, something broke. His heart began to race uncontrollably. His palms turned cold. His voice trembled. He tried to slow down, to think clearly, to regain control, but the harder he tried, the worse it became. Words collapsed in his throat. Thoughts scattered, and in that moment, something terrifying happened. His intelligence disappeared, not because it wasn't there, but because his body wouldn't let it out. Across the table, another man spoke next, less prepared, less insightful, less intelligent, but calm, grounded, steady. He delivered his idea with clarity and confidence, and he won. Ethan sat there in silence, watching his opportunity slip away, and for the first time in his life, he understood something brutal. He wasn't being outsmarted. He was being outperformed by someone whose body could support his mind. That night, sitting alone in the dark, the truth finally surfaced. He hadn't been building strength. He had been building a prison. a brilliant mind, trapped inside a weak vessel, and no matter how sharp his thoughts became, they would never matter if they couldn't survive the moment of pressure. Chapter 2. The Discovery. Ethan didn't sleep that night. He sat in silence, the memory of the boardroom replaying over and over in his mind. Not the data, not the strategy. The moment he froze, the moment his body betrayed him. For years he believed success was a thinking game, that if he could just become smarter, sharper, more prepared, everything else would fall into place. But what he experienced wasn't a lack of knowledge. It was a collapse, and he couldn't explain it. The next day, he met his friend Daniel, one of the few people who had watched his journey from the beginning. Daniel didn't say much. He just listened. Then he reached into his bag and placed a book on the table, the Book of 5 Rings. Ethan looked at it, confused. "I don't need philosophy," he said quietly. "I need to fix whatever happened yesterday." Daniel shook his head. "That's exactly why you need this." Inside the cover, a single sentence was written. "You're trying to win battles with half an army." Ethan frowned. At first it sounded dramatic, almost exaggerated, but something about it stayed. That night, he opened the book, and within the first few pages, something shifted. Not motivation, not inspiration, recognition, because what he found wasn't just about combat or swords. It was about completeness. The man who wrote this, Miyamoto Musashi, was not just a warrior. He was a strategist, an artist, a philosopher. He didn't separate thinking from action. He trained both, relentlessly. Ethan kept reading, and the deeper he went, the more uncomfortable the truth became. For centuries, the most capable men in history were never divided. They didn't choose between mind and body. They developed both, because survival demanded it. Only recently had that changed. Only recently had people like him been taught that focusing purely on intellect was enough, that physical strength was optional, irrelevant, even beneath him. And suddenly, everything made sense. Every moment of anxiety, every lack of focus, every time his thoughts failed to translate into action, it wasn't random. It was structural. He had built himself incompletely. A mind without a foundation, a weapon without a handle, and in moments of pressure, it collapsed exactly as it should. Ethan closed the book slowly. For the first time, he wasn't frustrated. He was clear. He stood up, walked to the mirror, and looked at himself, not with judgment, but with honesty. "This isn't a thinking problem," he said under his breath. "It's a training problem." His phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. "Well?" Ethan stared at the screen for a moment, then typed back, "I've been fighting with half an army." There was a pause, then a reply. "So what are you going to do?" Ethan didn't hesitate this time. No overthinking, no analysis, just decision. "I'm done being divided." He put the phone down, and for the first time in years, he wasn't trying to understand the path. He was ready to walk it. Chapter 3. The Lie History Never Told You. Ethan couldn't stop thinking about what he had read. It wasn't just one idea that disturbed him. It was the pattern. A pattern so obvious. Once you saw it, you couldn't ignore it. He began digging deeper, not into modern self-help, not into productivity systems, but into history itself. And what he found shattered everything he had believed. Because for thousands of years, the idea of separating mind and body didn't exist. It would have been considered absurd. In ancient Japan, the samurai were not just warriors trained to kill. They were expected to master calligraphy, poetry, and philosophy with the same discipline they used to wield a blade. To be physically strong without mental depth was seen as crude. To be intellectually refined but physically weak was seen as incomplete. Honor required both, and Miyamoto Musashi embodied this perfectly. After surviving over 60 duels to the death, he didn't retire into comfort. He turned inward, painting, writing, refining his philosophy of life and combat. To him, the sword and the brush were not opposites. They were expressions of the same mastery. Ethan kept going. Ancient Greece told the same story. Plato, the symbol of intellectual philosophy, wasn't just a thinker. His real name was Aristocles. Plato was a nickname meaning broad, given to him because of his powerful physique. He was a wrestler, a competitor, a man who trained his body as seriously as his mind. And Socrates, the father of Western philosophy, fought as a soldier. He stood in brutal battles, carrying armor, enduring chaos, facing death directly. His philosophy wasn't born in comfort. It was forged under pressure. Then came the Renaissance. Leonardo da Vinci, one of the greatest minds in history, artist, inventor, visionary, but also known for his physical strength. Stories described him bending metal with his bare hands. For him, intellect and strength weren't separate paths. They were one system, one expression of human potential. Ethan leaned back in his chair, the weight of realization settling in. This wasn't coincidence. This was a blueprint. The greatest individuals across history weren't specialists trapped in one dimension. They were integrated, complete. So what changed? Why did the modern world teach the opposite? Why did it convince millions of people that they had to choose? Ethan didn't need a book to answer that anymore, because the answer was obvious. Division creates weakness. A man who can think, but cannot act, is controllable. A man who is strong, but cannot think, is predictable. But a man who can do both, he becomes dangerous, unpredictable, independent. And that kind of man is hard to control. Ethan stared at his reflection in the dark screen. For years, he thought he was optimizing his life, focusing only on what mattered. But now he saw it clearly. He hadn't been optimizing. He had been limiting himself, cutting his potential in half, and calling it efficiency. He closed his eyes for a moment, then whispered quietly, "No more. Because once you see the lie, you can't go back to living inside it." Chapter 4. The Biology of Weakness. Ethan thought he understood the problem. He thought it was philosophical, a mindset shift, a change in perspective. But what he discovered next was far more unsettling, because this wasn't just about belief. It was biology, and biology doesn't care what you think. It responds to how you live. He started researching what actually happens inside the body when it's neglected. Not opinions, not motivation, mechanisms, and what he found explained everything he had experienced. A weak body doesn't just limit movement, it rewires your mind. When your body lacks strength, your system shifts into a constant low-grade stress state. Cortisol rise, the hormone designed to help you survive danger, becomes your baseline. And when cortisol stays high for too long, it clouds your thinking. Focus becomes unstable, memory weakens, decision-making slows down. At the same time, testosterone, the hormone linked to drive, confidence, and assertiveness, begins to drop. Not just in extreme cases. In normal people living sedentary lives, that quiet hesitation Ethan felt in high-pressure moments, that wasn't personality, it was chemistry. Then came circulation. When you don't move, your blood flow decreases. Less oxygen reaches your brain, and your brain is an oxygen-hungry organ. Even a small drop affects clarity, attention, and cognitive speed. Ethan paused when he read that, because suddenly it all clicked. The brain fog, the restless energy, the inability to focus even when he wanted to. He thought it was a discipline problem. It wasn't. His body was starving his mind. Then he discovered something even more powerful. When you train your body under stress, lifting weights, pushing through discomfort, forcing adaptation, your brain changes. Not metaphorically, physically. The prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for focus, control, and decision-making, becomes stronger. At the same time, the amygdala, the fear center, becomes less reactive. Meaning, you don't just feel stronger, you become less anxious, more controlled, more decisive. Ethan leaned back, staring at the ceiling. All those years trying to fix his mind, when the real solution was never in his head, it was in his body. And then he remembered something he had read earlier. A simple sentence from Miyamoto Musashi: "The way is in training, not thinking, not planning, training." Because training forces alignment. It forces your biology to support your intention. It removes the gap between what you want to do and what you're capable of doing. Ethan exhaled slowly. For the first time, he didn't feel confused. He felt exposed, because the truth was undeniable. He wasn't undisciplined. He was untrained, and no amount of thinking would ever replace that. Chapter 5. The war begins. The next morning, Ethan stood in front of the gym entrance. He hadn't been inside one in years, not because he couldn't, but because he never believed he needed to. Now, standing there, something felt different. Not motivation, not excitement, resistance. His mind started immediately. "This isn't you. You're wasting time. You should be working, learning, improving your skills." The same voice that had guided his life for years. Logical, convincing, comfortable, and for the first time, He didn't listen. He walked in. The smell of iron. The sound of weights hitting the ground. Bodies moving with purpose. It felt foreign. Unfamiliar. Almost hostile. Ethan started simple. Push-ups. He dropped to the floor, positioned his hands, and lowered himself down. 1, 2, 3. By 5, his arms began to shake. By 8, his body collapsed. He hit the ground, breathing hard, chest burning. 8. That was his limit. 8. For a man who prided himself on discipline, intelligence, and control, this was humiliating. He sat there for a moment, staring at the floor, a quiet realization settling in. This is who I really am, not the version in his head, not the identity built through achievements and recognition, but the raw, undeniable truth. Weak. And strangely, that truth didn't break him. It grounded him, because for the first time he wasn't guessing. He wasn't theorizing. He was facing reality. That night, something unexpected happened. As soreness spread through his body, his mind felt different, quieter, clearer. He sat down to work, expecting the usual chaos, the racing thoughts, the scattered focus, but it wasn't there. For the first time in years, he worked without friction. No internal debate. No endless overthinking. Just action. And that's when it hit him. Exhaustion had done something his thinking never could. It silenced the noise. Ethan returned the next day. And the next, each session felt like a battle, not against the weights, but against himself. Every rep came with the same voice. Stop. This is enough. You've already done more than yesterday. And every time, he answered with action. Week 1. Pain. Frustration. Doubt. Week 2. Slight improvement. A little more control. A little less hesitation. Week 3. Something changed. The fog that had followed him for years began to lift. Decisions came faster. Focus held longer. Energy stabilized. It wasn't dramatic, but it was undeniable. He started to understand something deeper. The gym wasn't building his body. It was rebuilding his mind. Every rep under pressure was teaching him to stay. Every moment of discomfort was training him not to escape. Every time he chose to continue instead of quit, he was rewriting something fundamental. Not just strength, identity. He wasn't becoming someone new. He was removing the version of himself that had been built on avoidance. And in its place, something far more dangerous was emerging. A man who could think and act without hesitation. Chapter 6. The System of Integration. By month 3, Ethan realized something important. Random effort wouldn't be enough. Going to the gym when he felt like it, pushing hard one day and disappearing the next. That was the same scattered pattern that had defined his old life. And scattered effort creates scattered results. So he did something different. He built a system, not complicated, not perfect, but consistent. Every morning, he woke up at the same time. No negotiation. No debate. The alarm rang, and he moved. Cold water hit his skin before his mind had time to resist. Then came stillness. 10 minutes of silence. Not to relax, but to observe. To watch the voice in his head without obeying it. Then training. Simple. Brutal. Effective. Push. Pull. Lift. Carry. No distractions. No phone. No escape. Just him. And the work. At first, it felt mechanical, like forcing a routine onto a life that didn't want it. But over time, something shifted. It stopped feeling like effort and started feeling like identity. Ethan wasn't trying to be disciplined anymore. He became someone who trained. And that difference changed everything, because discipline costs energy, but identity saves it. He no longer asked, "Do I feel like it today?" The question disappeared. Training was no longer a decision. It was who he was. And as his body adapted, something deeper began to emerge. Resilience. Not the loud, motivational kind, but quiet, stable, unshakable. He started testing it. Cold mornings where everything in him wanted to stay in bed. Long days where his body felt heavy and tired. Stressful moments where his mind looked for an excuse to skip. And every time, he showed up. Not perfectly, but consistently. That consistency began to spill into every part of his life. At work, he no longer hesitated before difficult decisions. He acted, not recklessly, but without the old paralysis. Conversations became clearer, his words more direct, his presence heavier, not aggressive, grounded. And then came the deeper realization. This wasn't about fitness. It was about alignment. For the first time, his mind and body were moving in the same direction. No internal conflict, no split, no second voice pulling him away. Just one system, executing. He remembered something he had read from Miyamoto Musashi: do nothing which is of no use. Before, he thought it meant efficiency, cut distractions, optimize time. But now he understood the real meaning. Remove anything that divides you, anything that weakens your focus, anything that pulls your body and mind in opposite directions, because division is where energy leaks, and alignment is where power is built. Ethan looked at his reflection one morning after training, sweat on his skin, breath steady, eyes clear. For the first time in years, he didn't just see potential, he saw capability, and that changed the way he walked into the world, because a man who knows he can rely on himself moves differently, decides differently, lives differently, and this was only the beginning. Chapter 7. The Final Test. It didn't come in the gym. It didn't come during training. It came where it always mattered most. Pressure. Month 10. Ethan walked into the same boardroom where everything had once collapsed. Same table, same executives, same stakes. Nothing had changed, except him. As he took his seat, he felt it. The old memory trying to surface, the echo of failure, the moment his body had betrayed him. For a second, it was there. Then it passed. Because this time, his body didn't react. His breathing stayed steady, his posture grounded, his hands still. No shaking, no racing heart, just presence. The meeting began. Voices filled the room. Tension built. A major decision had to be made fast. A competitor had launched something aggressive, and the company was losing ground. The CEO looked around the table. We need a strategy now. Silence. The kind of silence that used to break Ethan. The kind that triggered doubt, hesitation, overthinking. But not anymore. This time he didn't wait. He didn't calculate every possible outcome. He didn't fight himself. He simply stood. I have a plan. All eyes turned, and something subtle but powerful happened. They listened, not because his idea was perfect, but because his presence held the room. He began to speak. Clear, direct, uninterrupted. No rushing, no second guessing. Every word carried weight, not just from thought, but from certainty. Because behind every sentence, there was something new. Stability. The strategy itself was bold, aggressive. It required decisive action and full commitment. Old Ethan would have softened it, added disclaimers, protected himself from risk. But this time he didn't. He delivered it exactly as it needed to be said. Then he stopped. Silence again, but different. Now it wasn't tension, it was attention. The CEO leaned forward slightly. Can you execute this? Ethan didn't hesitate. Yes? No explanation. No justification. Just truth. The decision was made in that moment. Do it. Over the next 3 months, everything was tested. The plan wasn't easy. Problems surfaced. Pressure increased. Deadlines tightened. But something had changed fundamentally. Ethan didn't freeze. He didn't spiral. He adapted. Every challenge met with action. Every obstacle handled without panic. Not because he had all the answers, but because he could stay in the moment long enough to find them. Body and mind, working together. No gap, no delay. And the result? The company didn't just recover, it dominated. The competitor pulled back. The board recognized it. Promotion followed. But that wasn't the real victory. The real victory was internal, because Ethan finally understood something most people never realize. Confidence isn't built by thinking. It's built by evidence. Proof that when pressure comes, you won't collapse. That your body won't betray your mind. That you can act when it matters. Later that evening, he stood alone in the gym. Same place where he couldn't do 10 push-ups. Now stronger, calmer, different. He looked at his reflection, not searching for validation, not chasing improvement, just observing. And for the first time, there was no conflict, no division, no second voice. Just one system, one direction, one man, complete. And in that silence, one truth became undeniable. The world doesn't reward potential. It rewards execution. And execution belongs to those who are no longer divided. Final chapter. The choice is yours. Now you see it, not as an idea, not as motivation, but as truth. Ethan didn't become successful because he found a new strategy. He didn't unlock some hidden productivity hack. He did something far more difficult. He stopped being divided. For years, he lived the way most people do, sharpening one side while neglecting the other. Thinking more would solve everything. Planning more would fix the problem. But the truth is simple. A divided man will always hesitate, always overthink, always fall short when it matters most. Because in the moment of pressure, you don't rise to your ideas. You fall to your level of training. That's what Miyamoto Musashi understood centuries ago. The way is in training, not in thinking, not in waiting, not in preparing endlessly. Training. Because only training unites what has been separated. Only training removes the gap between intention and action. And now the question is no longer whether this is true. The question is what you're going to do with it. Because you have two paths. The first is the familiar one. You stay where you are. You keep thinking, keep planning, keep telling yourself you'll start when the time is right. You remain intelligent, but fragile. Capable, but inconsistent. Full of potential, but unable to deliver it under pressure, operating at half capacity, and calling it normal. The second path is harder. You begin, not perfectly, not dramatically, but honestly. You wake up tomorrow, and you take one action that aligns your body with your mind. 10 push-ups, a short run, a moment of stillness. It doesn't matter how small it is. What matters is that you stop negotiating with yourself, because the moment you act, you step out of theory and into transformation. So here's your decision. If you're ready to stop living divided, if you're ready to become someone who can think and act, type yes in the comments. Not for me, for yourself. A signal that you're done waiting. Because this path doesn't require talent. It requires honesty, consistency, and the willingness to face discomfort without running. Remember this. You don't need more information. You don't need more motivation. You need alignment. And alignment is built through action. One step, one rep, one decision at a time. The choice is yours. You can stay where you are, or you can begin the process of becoming complete. Because in the end, only one truth remains. Only action creates results. So start. And as you walk this path, stay present. Walk with discipline, and move forward with quiet certainty. This is your path now.